On this episode of Ideas, I talk with Alex Banayan about his brand new book, The Third Door, the wild quest to uncover how the world's most successful people launched their careers. I open up this episode, ask him about his dad's passing last year. He got really vulnerable. I really appreciate Alex's heart and willingness to discuss what his dad taught him. And he's just got a lot of wisdom from the past 7 years of writing his brand new book. So I think you'll enjoy this episode. All right, here we go. All right, today's guest is Alex Banayan. He is an entrepreneur and keynote speaker who has been named to Forbes 30 Under 30 list and Business Insider's Most Powerful People Under 30. He has also contributed to Fast Company, The Washington Post, Entrepreneur, and TechCrunch, and has been featured in major media including Fortune, Forbes, Business Week, Bloomberg TV, Fox News, and CBS News. And he's here today to talk about his new book, The Third Door, the wild quest to uncover how the world's most successful people launched their careers, which is out on June 5th. Alex, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I just got to start off by saying I love the book. There's so much in it, and we won't get near unpacking the entire book, so people will definitely have to pick up a copy and read it to get the full impact of it. And I saw you posted something online and the great endorsements you're getting so far, so great feedback around it. That's awesome.
Thank you, man.
Before we dive into the ideas, some of the ideas behind the book, last year, you end the book with the story that your dad passed away last year. And the way you ended that book, it caught me off guard, but it was this beautiful thing that caught me off guard, just the way you remembered him. And it got me thinking as I concluded your book, just the things that my dad taught me. If there's a lesson my dad taught me, it was about hard work. And I wouldn't be where I'm at without that. And it makes me really think about what I'm teaching my kids as they grow up.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you this, not only because it's important, I think listeners can reflect on this too, but to allow you to honor your dad, to remember your dad, to dedicate this to your dad. I wanted to ask you, would you say was the biggest lesson your dad taught you growing up?
First of all, I appreciate the kind words about my dad. And, the one interesting thing is that question is, as I'm sure you know, Cal Fussman, who is, one of my biggest mentors and one of my closest friends, that's his question that he uses to open people up. So I've used it as well along the journey in the book, but I've never actually answered it out loud myself. I've thought about it, of course, a ton.
Sure.
And actually, when my dad first got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, I wrote him a letter with that sort of as my prompt. And I wrote two things. I made one list of like 50 things that he's taught me, of like 50 bullet points of things that he's taught me and given me. But I also wrote out a whole other page of just this one story. And I've never shared this story out loud, but other than with my family. But one of the stories that I love most about my dad is it takes place when I was about 8 years old. I was in, I think, third grade. And we were doing some kind of project in school where we needed a poster board. And there's a pharmacy a few blocks from my house that, has a school supplies aisle that has poster boards. So before school, I asked my dad if we could stop by the pharmacy for a minute so I can get a poster board. And for some reason, I think because we were like late for school, my dad gave me like the $2 or the $5 and let me go into the grocery store or the convenience store by myself to go buy the poster board. I don't think I've ever been inside of a store by myself at that point. I was like 8 years old. So it was like pretty exciting. I go inside. I knew where it was because I'd been in that store, hundreds of times. I get the poster, go to the cash register, hand the $5 bill. Like, it's a very exciting moment. It's the first time
Yeah.
I've ever, like, giving money to someone at a register. And she rings it up. I think the poster was like, it's like $1.50. And for some reason, I think she saw my $5 bill and must have thought it was a $50 bill. So she gave me back like $48 and change. And I'm 8 years old. Like, I just think I won the lottery.
Yeah,
And
that's a
I'm
lot of
thinking,
money.
yeah, and I know like my parents would, argue about money all the time. And like, so I knew money was an important thing. So I thought, like, man, my parents are going to be so freaking happy that I just like won the lottery. So
Hmm.
like, but I knew to like be quiet about it. When she gave it to me, I didn't say anything. I sort of like stuffed in my pocket, said thank you, and like ran out of the store with a poster.
Yeah.
You know, I'm so excited to tell my dad. He's waiting in the car. I open up the car door, I like jump inside, and I like show him all the money, like waiting for him to like start cheering with me. And he looked like really disappointed, and I couldn't understand why. And he explained to me that that woman, probably was having a tough day and made a mistake. And because I didn't say anything, her boss, might think that she stole the money. She might get fired. She might lose her job. And he said, well, making money is good. You shouldn't do it at someone else's expense.
Hmm.
And I remember when I was 8 years old, that really stuck with me because it was the opposite of what I was expecting to hear from my dad. I thought he would, throw me a high five for finding a way to get some quick cash.
Hmm.
And he actually made me go back inside the store by myself and return the money to the checkout woman. And
Yeah.
that's something that's always stuck with me.
I bet. And these stories that we can all remember about our dads. I mean, last year was this with your dad's passing. It was a roller coaster because I mean, I kind of know the time frame for books. So you were wrapping up your book last year, and then you lost your dad in the same year. Is that how the time frame ended up?
Yeah,
Or
so the book
it's a
was
roller coaster, though.
exactly, the book's
Wow.
been a 7-year process.
Yeah.
So I started 7 years ago when I was 18, and my dad got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer about 2 years ago. So he got diagnosed when I was, writing the final, I was, so I sort of see the book in three segments. The first segment, the biggest one, is the journey of getting all the interviews.
Hmm.
And that was about like a 4 year, you know, 4 year journey, 3.5, 4 year journey. The next leg was the leg of writing the actual narrative of the book, which was another about like 3 year process, 2.5 year, 3 year process. And then the final leg, which took another year, was editing and rewriting the book.
Mm.
So in total, about 7 years. And my dad got diagnosed with cancer about 60 or 70% into the process of writing the book.
Mm.
So, and all of this sort of like the timeline really overlaps because I got some interviews while I was doing the writing. And as you read in the Jessica Alba chapter, that's really where it all sort of comes to light. But when I was,
Hmm.
when I was trying to interview Jessica Alba, it wasn't like, oh, this is going to be the chapter about my dad's cancer. It was going to be, this is a chapter about Jessica Alba and the Honest Company. But what ended up happening is Jessica and I ended up talking about death and cancer the whole time.
Well, that was a really neat and vulnerable section because she was able to be there for you in this. I mean, honestly, it was probably a dark time for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Figuring out how to navigate that time in your life when those things you don't expect hit you, and you're learning how to live life, and you have this huge project to undertake. And I mean, I can only say your dad would be very proud of this book. I don't know if he was able to read one of the final drafts that
Appreciate that,
that
man.
you were able to put together, but The whole book is about your journey. You were able to get people like Bill Gates and Jessica Alba, as you just mentioned. You were able to interview all these huge names and to find out what their success stories are. But the death of your dad is a huge snippet, but yet in your grand story, I mean, the story that sticks out really in your journey as you read the book is the Price is Right story. So going from something dark like your passing of your death,
Yeah.
but then going to this fun, huge thing that happened that kind of got this book rolling. If you would share with that, because that seems to be the beginning of how it all came about, and then to where you're at now and launching the book. If you would kind of share a little bit about the Price is Right story, because that story there is fascinating.
Totally. And I agree with you in the sense that between my dad's passing and the Price is Right story, while they seem, very opposite, in my eyes, they're actually, different sides of the same coin. It's really about like, the peaks of an emotional experience. And the Price is Right was a peak of like, joy and possibility and exuberance. And my dad's was a peak in grief and loss.
Yeah.
But the opposite would really be, apathy or, being stoic or a lack of emotion. But both the Price is Right and my dad, and I've never really thought of it that way, but that's really what it is. They were both like extremely high emotional moments on the journey, and they sort of bookend the story. And to share some context, the way the Price is Right came to be was 7 years ago. I was going through this life crisis. Not only did I not know what I wanted to do with my life, I didn't know how all the people who I looked up to, how they did it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? How did Bill Gates sell his first piece of software out of his dorm room when nobody knew his name? Or how did Warren Buffett get his first meetings when, he was this unknown stockbroker? So I went through a bunch of business books and self-help books looking for answers, but eventually I was left empty-handed. And that's when my naive 18-year-old thinking kicked in. And I thought, well, if no one's going to write the book I'm dreaming of reading, why not write it myself?
Mm.
And I thought it'd be super simple. I would just call up Bill Gates, interview him, interview everyone else, and I'd be done in a few months. That I assumed would be the easy part. The hard part to me was getting money to fund the journey.
Yeah.
I would have to travel to Seattle, and it would cost plane tickets cost money, and it was money I didn't have because I was buried in tuition payments. I was all out of bar mitzvah cash. So there had to be a way to make some quick money. So 2 nights before final exams my freshman year of college, I was in the library doing what everybody does right before finals. I was on Facebook.
Yeah.
And on Facebook, I see someone was posting about free tickets to The Price is Right, and I was filming the next day. And the first thought that came into my mind was, what if I go on the show and win some money to fund the book?
Yep.
Not my brightest moment in hindsight, but at the time, I was like, okay, but that's a horrible idea because I had never seen a full episode of the show before. I've, of course, seen bits and pieces my whole life, but I had never seen a full episode. Plus, I had finals in 2 days, and, I couldn't afford to fail finals and get kicked out of pre-med. So that night, I decided to do the logical thing and pull an all-nighter to study. But I didn't study for finals. I studied how to hack The Price is Right. And I went on the show the next day and executed this ridiculous strategy, and I ended up winning the entire showcase showdown, winning a sailboat, selling the sailboat, and that's how I funded the book.
And there you go. And I love that story because it's not the typical. I mean, have you always seen things kind of out of the box? Because that's not the typical response to think that. I mean, if nobody's ever told you that before, at least that's not how I would see things. I mean, have you ever thought about that? Or I'm guessing you have.
Yeah, and it's always funnier in hindsight because at the
Yeah.
time it's like a really idiotic thing that I'm doing. And what I realized is that a lot of the moments in this book that in hindsight seem like this like brilliant move at the time were like complete, ludicrous, preposterous ideas. Whether it was in the book Chasing Larry King Through a Grocery Store to get the interview with Larry King, or to get the interview with Tim Ferriss, the author of the 4 Hour Work Week. I hid in a bathroom and crouched by a urinal for 30 minutes and jumped out as Tim was walking by the bathroom. There's
Mm.
all these things that in hindsight are these great stories, but at the time were just, the peaks of my stupidity, but they ended up working out. And one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten on the journey of this book came from Richard Saul Warman, who is the founder of TED, the TED conference, TED Talks. And he told me, there's 2 pieces of advice he lives by. 1, if you don't ask, you don't get. And 2, most things don't work out.
Mm.
And this book is really a testament to those things, which is whether it was, that chapter about shadowing Tony Hsieh for my 20th birthday, or whether it's, getting the interview with Bill Gates and the 4-day adventure with Lady Gaga. While all those things were remarkable, for every story of something working out, there were 10 more stories of things not working out. And it
Yeah.
was the mistakes along the way and the failures and the moments where I fell flat on my face, the moments where I'm cradled on the floor of a Motel 6 during one of the biggest storms in Omaha's history with a cockroach walking in front of my face. In many ways, those are some of the most powerful moments of the book.
I bet. I mean, you were actually living the message out in this book as you're writing it. There's a lot of times where you pop through the narrative. And you mentioning Richard Saul Wurman, I love some advice that he gave you. He said to you, you want to know the secret to changing the world, stop trying to change it.
Mm,
Do great work and let your work change the world. And
I love that.
that line jumped out at me as I was reading, and I actually stopped and jotted that down. But I mean, that's just one piece of advice that people gave you throughout the book. But I wanted to ask you, after reading the book, after seeing all these pieces of advice that people gave you throughout, did you go in thinking that you would find what you did, that there was a third door? Or did it blindside you? What did that process look like as far as finding that there was a third door for you?
Absolutely. And whether it was my journey of getting the interviews or it was the journeys of all the people who I did interview, what I realized is they all live life the exact same way. And the analogy that came to me, like you mentioned, is this third door analogy, which essentially means that life and business and success, it's sort of like getting into a nightclub in the sense that there's always 3 ways in. There's the first door where 99% of people wait in line hoping to get in. And that's where the line curves around the block. It's the main entrance. And then there's the second door, the VIP entrance, where the billionaires and the celebrities break through. And for some reason, school and society have this way of making you feel like those are the only 2 ways in. You're either born into it or you wait your turn like everybody else. But what I've learned is that there's always, always the third door. And it's the entrance where you jump out of line, run down the alley, bang on the door 100 times, crack open the window, go through the kitchen. There's always a way in. And it doesn't matter if that's how Gates sold his first piece of software or how Spielberg became the youngest director in Hollywood history, they all took that third door. So what I've learned is that every single story in this book, whether it's, the 2-year quest to get to Bill Gates, or it's the story of Bill Gates selling his first piece of software, or the story of how Pitbull has reinvented himself, or how, Maya Angelou and Jane Goodall launched their careers, every single one of these people had to take the third door because no one achieves a radical dream by waiting in line hoping it happens.
It's good advice for anybody contemplating whether to take a step or not. You have to actually take action and do something. After reading your book, I thought about the saying, it's more about who you know rather than what you know. And I guess because of the different ways that you were trying to get interviews, maybe with Warren Buffett or maybe some of the stories that you had mentioned throughout the book. But what do you think about that saying, it's more about who you know rather than what you know? Do you think that's true? Do you think there's a balance to it? Or is it completely what you know will get you to where you want to be?
I think it's a balance. And I
Okay.
actually think I used to, when I was starting off on my journey, I definitely thought it's like, oh, it's all about who you know. Like, that's the key. And I was, trying to meet people and trying to find a way in. And, that's very important. But what I've learned is my take is it's sort of like 80 or 90% what you know.
Okay.
And that's the opposite of what I thought early on. I thought it was the other way around.
Sure.
Now, look, if you only have that 80% of what you know, and let's say you've achieved perfectly on the what you know, so you have that 80%, but you're at a 0 for who you know, the equation doesn't work. So it's not like you can rely on just one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But, let's say it's flipped. Let's say 80% of your talent is who you know, but when you start talking to people, you're just blabbering, you're incoherent, you like haven't done your homework. Very quickly, people will catch on. And if you're trying to do something of, real value that's trying to make the world a better place, that's really trying to move the needle, you have to be an expert in your domain. You have to be well researched.
Yeah.
And when I interviewed Bill Gates and I asked him for his negotiation tactics, one of the first things he said is that, once you get to the negotiation table and let's say people are underestimating you, the best way to turn that around is to just blast them with your expertise on the subject. So again, while it's important to know the right person so you can get to the table, if you don't have that expertise, that mastery over your subject, it all falls apart.
And talking about who you know, that makes me think about, you mentioned your friend and mentor a lot throughout the book, and he seemed to play a vital role in shaping you early on as an entrepreneur, but you end up, I won't get into the full story because I won't do it justice in the book, but talking about who you know, it makes me think of not only friends, but also mentorship, and he kind of played that role in your life. But as far as your best friend that you mentioned in the book, why do you think that y'all were attracted to each other to become best friends? I mean, I can think about my best friend, he's played a vital role in almost shaping who I've become. We've been friends for years and years. I found that relationship interesting. And the idea of mentorship, did that ever come up with him, or was it a natural fitting, or how did that work for you?
There's this, I assume you're talking about Elliot Bisnow.
Yeah, Elliot.
And yeah, like you said, Elliot has played a giant role in the book. And in my opinion, it's my favorite part of the book, the whole adventures with Elliot and how it weaves in and out of the whole story. He is, one of just the most remarkable people I've ever met in my life. And I'll tell you something that someone else taught me about what attracts a mentor to a mentee. And I don't know if it's true, but it sounds right to me. I got this advice from a man who used to be a vice president at Morgan Stanley. Actually, excuse me, at Goldman Sachs. He was a vice president at Goldman Sachs. And Elliot actually had introduced me to him. And I was having breakfast with him. He's this incredible, really brilliant guy. And I was asking him about how he chooses who to mentor. And he said, a mentor relationship comes down to 3 things. One, and they're all subconscious things, by the way. They're not really things that are consciously engineered. They more just happen subconsciously. He said, 1, the mentor has to see some part of herself or himself in the mentee. 2, the mentor has to have this desire to help make the mentee more like her or him, in the way of advice or guidance. And the most surprising thing to me is that the mentor has to want to become a little bit more like the mentee. And that was actually the most surprising part. And what he told me is like, if let's say, a CEO of a big company starts mentoring, one of the interns at the company and everyone's really confused about why that's happening, one of the reasons might be that CEO is either consciously or unconsciously is missing that youthful enthusiasm about his own company or her own company. So they're using that mentee relationship to, re-inject that enthusiasm into their lives. Or maybe, Cal Fussman is a great example, one of my mentors who I met through the book. he wanted to learn how to be an entrepreneur and how to use the internet and how to start a speaking career. And so when he was mentoring me, while I felt I was getting unbelievable value, I wasn't aware of it, but he was learning a ton too.
That's cool.
And it's something that, you can't really predict because no one really knows what someone else is looking for, but that's sort of the magic of how a mentor relationship happens.
I love that. I haven't really thought about that either. So that is a surprising aspect of mentorship, wanting to become a little more like the mentor. Wow, you offered a lot for us today, Alex. We didn't even get to a majority of the book, but I think listeners will get to hear your heart a lot throughout this conversation, which is exactly what I wanted. So you're a great guy. You can feel yourself through the writing. It's just really well written, and
That
it's
means so much, man.
there's a lot of struggle in there, a lot of heartache, but a lot of joy. And we are all emotional beings, and we all go through things. And there's the high points and the low points, and it all helps shape us to who we become. There's a question that I like to ask everybody towards the end of the show. And that one question is, it could be something that we've already talked about, you just want to highlight. It could be an idea that we didn't get to today. But if there's one last piece of advice that you'd like to leave listeners with today, what would that be?
It would be that there's always, always a way. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned on this journey is that really the most powerful thing you can give yourself and you can give others is a sense of possibility. Because when you change what someone believes is possible, you change what becomes possible. And as soon as, that's really the core of the book. And that's really the most powerful thing you can give someone is knowing deep down that there's always a way. Because as soon as you know that, all these doors start appearing in front of you that have always been there. You just assumed they were locked.
That's such beautiful advice.
Thank you, man. And thank you again for this really fun talk.
Yeah, this has been great. Last question for you. Where would you like to send people to find out more about you and your work?
So the book is, available everywhere books are sold: Amazon, iBooks, Audible, every bookstore out there. And online, you can find me at thirddoorbook.com. So THIRD, thirddoorbook.com. And on social, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, at Alex Banayan. So AlexBanayan.
Perfect. Thank you again, Alex, for coming on the show. This has been a really fun conversation. It's been fun getting to know you more.
Thank you. And again, thank you so much for, not only reading the book, but feeling it so deeply.
Absolutely. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you got something out of these ideas. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.